seeking truth is something we all aspire to, or well, we're all trying to do. And so to bring people who have studied the Secret Doctrine, some of you way before I started, is a wonderful thing to be able to share this thought atmosphere together and imbibe something. I don't need to do so much of an introduction to the Secret Doctrine. Thank God I had Maria and Pablo already do some of that. Through the Secret Doctrine, HPB brought the wisdom of the ages to the Western world. It encapsulates the most basic or most fundamental concepts that underlie all of Theosophical teachings. What she did was she took the secret ancient aphorisms from the stanzas of Zen, which she translated herself, and she put in her commentaries for us to be able to understand them a little bit more, because when we read them, they don't really easily sink in as to what they mean. And in doing so, what she did was really she culled from traditions from all over the world, ancient traditions, from religions, the great religions of the world, from philosophy, and even the science of her day, which was at that time still pretty materialistic. And so it is a synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy. So, without further ado, Theosophy is the ageless wisdom. Ageless because it has been here from time immemorial. As the key to Theosophy says, it has existed throughout the endless cycles of the past, so that it will ever exist through the infinitudes of the future. So it has been here from time immemorial, and she is saying it's going to be here way into the future, because Theosophy is synonymous with everlasting truth. Maria and Pablo had already alluded to the fact that HPB repeatedly affirmed both the antiquity and the universality of these teachings. These truths are in no sense put forward as a revelation, she said. She did not dream this up. It was not given to her by some entities, but she said, what is contained in this work, the two volumes of the Secret Doctrine, and in fact, there were maybe a third, and she had planned a fourth. What is contained in this work is to be found scattered throughout the thousands of volumes embodying the scriptures of the great Asiatic and early European religions, hidden under glyph and symbol, and hitherto left unnoticed because of this veil. I would like to add to that statement that it was not just from the scriptures of the Asiatic and early European religions where these came from. If you read the Secret Doctrine, hidden in mythology are a lot of these truths, hidden in many of the creation myths or creation stories of ancient peoples or indigenous peoples. There are these truths hidden in symbols. So she called from everywhere in, you would say, the world. Now, I wanted to focus on just the one most important point in the whole of the Secret Doctrine. And that is that underlying all the teachings is one central idea, the affirmation of the one nameless reality from which and in which all things have their being, from which we all have our being. So she's postulating that there is this one nameless reality, and we all have our being in that. But also, We all come from that. Let's unpack that a little bit. But first of all, Ian T. Hoskins, who compiled a lot of these important quotations from the Secret Doctrine, especially from the proem and the summing up, said there can be no understanding of Theosophy without understanding this most basic premise. In the Christian religion, there is the same statement. In him we live and move and have our being. I think Pablo mentioned this. The only difference is, in the Christian tradition, him is an anthropomorphic being, which Theosophy does not agree that there's a white guy there with a white beard and sitting on a throne, and that all of reality comes from there. We are talking about one universal principle, one reality from which everything comes. In the Upanishads, in the Hindu tradition, the same statement is given. Brahma is all, and all is one. And HPB translates that also, God is in everything, and the whole in God. So stopping for a moment, imagine what it is like. If we think that God is in everything, what is everything? From the tiniest particles in an atom to the billions of galaxies in the universe. She says, God is in all that. But not only that, all of that is in God, in this reality. How could that be possible? The only way it could be possible is if all of that is one. Does that make sense? In the Secret Doctrine, she gives a symbol that sort of encapsulates this. She describes a circle whose center is everywhere. In you, and you, and in all the galaxies. The center everywhere, but a circumference that is nowhere. Does that give the idea of everything and nothing outside of it? If we can kind of imagine that, that is the reality that we are talking about. And she says, it is the one life, eternal, has always been there, no beginning, no end. Always present, present in everything, omnipresent. Yet, periodical in its regular manifestations. Sometimes it's there, but sometimes there's a period of inactivity when we call pralaya, it is not there. When it is in activity, the word used in Theosophy is manvantara. When the universe comes out of latency into active manifestation. But everything is cyclic. And in time, it goes away again. In between the periods of manifestations, she says, reigns the dark mystery of being, which seems like, from our point of view, a nothingness. But it is there. The image, by the way, was the eye of God from NASA. And I just thought that that would be maybe some way for you to imagine that. The symbols, the images, don't take them literally. It's hard to find images. But I thought by putting an image up there, it might help us be able to imagine some of this. So they are limited symbols, okay? Here's one. This image here is really just energy fields. But I thought it sort of captured what G. de Perucker was talking about, and this is just my understanding. So he says, in order to be able to understand all of this, we have to go to the very beginning of manifestation, which is why HPB started with cosmogenesis, how the universe came to be. And GDP said, at the beginning of a cosmic manvantara, the cosmic period of activity, what happens is the universe is unrolled gradually out into an expression of the logos coming into activity. So, I just imagined that from the dark background where there was nothing in the beginning, coming out into manifestation is the beginning of what would be the universe, and then there's sort of an unrolling out. And I will explain a little bit more from one plane to another until we get to the physical world where we are. An important point in this quote is that everything comes from its own essence. Everything that comes into the universe is coming out from that same essence. And in the process of emanation, there's a series of veils are unfurled, veils or garments. We might think of them as the planes of nature, for example, with which it clothes itself until it reaches the lowest or most material stage, the physical. A little bit more of an explanation. The whole process of emanation, coming from that pralaya, when there's simply nothing, and then the first point, which is like the beginning of some kind of differentiation, and finally the formation of one plane after another, pictured here by a series of planes until the most dense, the densest plane, which is the physical where we are. And it's not all technical like this throughout the talk, but this is just background material. So the whole process of emanational unfolding can be likened to a column of pure light. Column of light, pure spirit in its highest parts. That's why it's pictured as white. And physical matter in its lowest, probably over there, with all intermediate stages of increasing substantiality in between. So what we can imagine is that from the very subtlest levels, which are not physical, there is this progressive descent into greater and greater material spheres. And HPB in the Secret Doctrine said, on each level are a multiplicity of beings or entities in varying degrees of consciousness and intelligence. So we might imagine that each plane in this descent is populated by hierarchies of beings in various stages of evolution. I put sparks up there just to give an idea that these levels are populated by the sparks or monads, which are the evolving entities populating each plane. But not only do they populate the plane, they actually make up the plane. What does that mean? In the physical plane, for example, we can say that everything is made up of the physical atoms which we don't even see. And in the summing up of the Secret Doctrine, each atom is a conscious being has consciousness. It says there's no such thing as dead matter. Everything has consciousness. So everything that's making up these planes have consciousness. What's more important is that all of them came from that which we might call the logos and are expressions of the logos. They all have the same essence from which they came, from the logos. In the process of evolution, right now most of our consciousness is down here. But as we are able to rise from plane to plane, she says, the more we ascend into the higher parts of our being, the more we become self-conscious of our identity with it. What does that mean? Right now, we are in the material, most of our consciousness is immersed in this material plane. We are so encased in matter. Rumi said, we are stars wrapped in skin. We are so encased in matter that we don't even perceive that part of us, the highest part of us. We think we are just here. But as we are able to unveil or realize that beyond the matter in which we are encased within us, deep within us, is that divinity. This is a quote from William Judge, one of the founders of the society with HPB and Occult. And he wrote, "Spirit is universal, indivisible, and common to all. In other words, there are not many spirits, one for each man, but solely one spirit, which shines upon all." When I was thinking about this unrolling from that origin and unrolling into manifestation, I thought about this thing with the hand, you know, and a gradual coming into manifestation, where if you think about it, if you imagine the fist to be that one source from which we came, and it unfurls, and it opens, and expresses in each plane, lower and lower, at the tip of the fingertips, at the tip of the fingers. Well, each finger actually feels like it is separate from the other fingers. And they all look different, just like we do, you know? And, but all of them are connected to the palm. All of them form the hand. So this is just like a limited analogy for how, despite the fact that these fingers, which are like us, which look like they're separate, which look like they're different from each other, but really they can't function without being together, without being one. And this palm, in which they all have their root, is like that spirit. In Theosophical language, Atma, our seventh principle. This Atma is the universal spirit. You don't have your own Atma, I don't have my own Atma. We all share one Atma, universal spirit. Think about the palm that all these fingers share. So that is what William Judge is saying here. Spirit is universal, that from which we are all connected, indivisible and common to all, so that there are not many spirits, one for each of us. No, there's only one spirit and it shines on all. Therefore, there's a common soul upon which wholeness and brotherhood rests. So I have belabored this oneness point because this is the most important thing to us Theosophists. It is the basis for that first object of universal brotherhood. And if we don't understand this, we're a little bit lacking as Theosophists, in my opinion. So, now, is this just all theoretical? Is this just all intellectual? You know, having one reality? HPB said, a key to understanding occult teachings is through analogy and correspondence. So she said, and her mistress Megistus said, as above, so below. If everything is interrelated, what would be above would also be reflected below. If we can see that everywhere, then a little bit of the intellectuality that is involved with this concept of oneness will start to disappear or be more understandable. Let's look at some examples. There are patterns that repeat throughout nature. If all the parts of nature had no relationship to each other, then everything would be random, as science claims. No point, just whatever comes up. However, there are patterns that repeat throughout nature. An example, the golden mean. This is, anyone here not familiar with the golden mean? Okay, the golden mean was used by the Greeks as a standard of beauty. You know, when you take a photograph, they tell you to put the subject, your child that you're taking a picture of, 1/3 of the screen, and that will make your photograph more beautiful. Why? It is based on the idea of the golden mean, which is a universal symbol, universal principle of beauty. If you take this big rectangle, and you divide it somewhere about 1/3 of the way, the distance from here to there and the distance from here to there makes up what is called the golden mean. And if you take the next rectangle, you can divide that into this, and the distance between this and that is also the same as the golden mean. In any case, without having to teach all of this basis of beauty in nature is reflected everywhere. It is reflected in the galaxies. It is reflected in hurricanes. It is reflected in various plants in the plant kingdom. Succulents, the whorls in a rose, a pine nut, a sunflower. It is reflected in shells. This is a cross-section of the Nautilus shell. And it is reflected in humans. Why is the Mona Lisa beautiful? Because the painter used the principle of the golden mean, which is pictured down there. And it's also in our bodies. The ear, the fist. See, everywhere in nature, these patterns are repeating. What does it suggest? It is suggesting that there is an underlying principle throughout nature where that is responsible for the repeating patterns. Let's look at something else. Designs in the action of the seemingly blindest forces. The movement from the small to the large. The movement from the simple to the complex. The movement from one to many. For example, I'm a chemist. I loved growing seed crystals. I loved growing crystals from seeds. A precious gem starts from a tiny seed crystal. From the one tiny seed crystal, you get more and more crystals. Eventually, you have a precious gem. A giant sequoia tree grows from a small pine nut. From the one small thing, you get something large. From one simple thing, you got something complex, a whole tree, which is I hear one of the largest living organisms in the world. And in the human body, we see the same pattern. The human body starts as a microscopic cell, a small cell going to a whole organism. A small, simple thing becoming the complex beings that we are. From one single fertilized cell, we get cell division until we have organs and we have this whole physical body that we possess. Patterns in nature suggesting a hidden principle that is behind all things. And so, in that small thing from which everything begins, it seems as though the future plan is already there. The design of what that tree will look like, the design of what our bodies will look like, seems to be already encoded in that small thing that we begin from. So there is a future plan, which suggests that there might be some intelligence behind all this. Making sense? Furthermore, at each level of complexity, we have systems that are integrated, self-organizing wholes, consisting of smaller parts and at the same time acting as parts of larger wholes. Let's see what that means. To the subatomic particles in an atom, the atom is like a universe. And yet that atom is part of our bodies, is in our bodies. And for our bodies, which are the integrated whole, which is larger than that, we also are just part of something bigger. Let's say our solar system. And our solar system, which is an organized whole, is still a small portion of an even bigger whole, like the cosmos. Therefore, Fritjof Capra, an Austrian physicist, said, these relationships appear to be the workings of an underlying, unseen principle of self-organization. There is an underlying, unseen principle underneath everything. It's good to hear that from a scientist. Everything in nature affects everything else. The stars, the moons, the planets affect us. We affect our world too. We affect each other. So again, the conclusion is there must be something that connects us all. There must be a divine plan at work behind all of this. And everything partakes of that plan. A 19th century poet, Francis Thompson, wrote, all things, by immortal power, near or far, hiddenly to each other linked are, that thou canst stir a flower without the troubling of a star. So we have a scientist who has acknowledged some kind of interrelationship in everything, a poet who has done the same. And here's another scientist some of you may recognize. Neil deGrasse Tyson is an astrophysicist. He hosts that show on TV called Cosmos. And even he has acknowledged, accepting our kinship with all life on Earth is not only solid science. In my view, it's also a soaring spiritual experience. Isn't that beautiful? But we don't feel that oneness all the time. we feel separate still. The separateness that we feel between ourselves and the world around us is an illusion. We have heard that before. That's not something new. It's not a reality. In very deed and truth, we are all one. So these bags of skin cause the illusion. In reality, the essence inside is one. As all Eastern philosophy teaches, there is but one self in all the infinite universe, and what we men call self is but the illusionary reflection of that one self. Sri Madhava Ashish wrote, unless we understand the harmonious interrelationships of all things, unless we perceive the divine purpose, which gives direction and significance to all events, then we all fall into the chaos of meaninglessness. And that is why all of us have gone through the process of asking the most basic questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of all this? That simple concept of the oneness of everything gives an answer to the most basic questions in life. So we have talked about oneness. What about purpose? The comings and goings of worlds and monads are not a series of random events, like science would claim. They arise through the purposeful striving towards full expression of the divine nature. So all of us have that deep divine yearning for something more. And that comes from this purposeful striving to fully express the divine nature within this case of skin, to fully be able to express that divinity, despite the fact that on the outside or the surface, we look like we are different and separate. We are on a pilgrimage whose mission is the expansion of consciousness and attain full realization of the higher life. So the only way we can really realize that divinity is through an expansion of consciousness beyond the bag of skin that we see, so that we can realize that there is a life beyond this physical, that there is a higher life. True spiritual perfection is the complete identification of our finite selves with the great all. This has been mentioned in the earlier talks as well. Complete identification of our finite selves with the great all. Once we have achieved that, we would be a Buddha. What does that mean? It means that we need to be able to reach the point where consciousness can expand such that we perceive universality. Not just this limited field in which we usually operate. To be able to perceive the universal in all things. We can also put it in a way that it means a return to wholeness with full self-consciousness. The use of the image of the ocean and the drop is a beautiful one. everything in the ocean is also in the drop. If there was color in the ocean, not reflection from the sun, but if it is colored, if it is salty, or whatever is there, it will also be in the drop. And when the drop is back in the ocean, you will never even see this thing, you won't even see where the drop begins or where the drop ends. That is the idea of how all of us really are part of that oneness. Now, what's the point of talking about all this? Well, something a little more practical. Sages from time immemorial have taught that the recognition of unity of all beings is the only assurance of happiness and fulfillment. Unless we can realize this, we can never be truly happy. Why is that? Before I go to that, let me continue with the next part of the quote. This acknowledgement of the unity of all things is the secret to health and well-being. It is the key to perfect peace. Let's think about this. When we are operating in the field of separateness, there is the me and the you. This is for me, not for you. It causes not only that separation, but it causes us to think in terms of, we have the emotions, for example, that cause someone else to be hurt. This is not for you, this is for me, I want this, I'm going to have this. When that is happening, don't you think that there will be unhappiness somewhere? And don't you think that that will also reflect on us in some ways? You see, people who are harmonious are happy people. People who are in conflict, they feel a burden they carry with them, and it's difficult to be happy. When we are in conflict with someone, especially those whom we love. So harmony is so essential to happiness and fulfillment. And that harmony can only spring from an acknowledgement that you are not different from me. It's the secret to health and well-being, it says. Recently, there was an article that scientists had found that a broken heart is connected with cancer. I think in the medical field, it is well known that people who have a lot of stress, anxieties, it forms some kind of knots inside of us that eventually somehow spring into all kinds of diseases. Okay, I don't know if that's scientific or not, just observation. And I think many people seem to believe that. So, an acknowledgement of the unity and interrelationship with all. If we can have that, we can have a key not only to happiness, but also to health and well-being, but also to peace, inner peace. Our interconnectedness requires a recognition of the need for harmony and compassion. And in the Voice of the Silence, HPB said, compassion is the law of laws, eternal harmony. It is the requirement for oneness that there should be harmony. Otherwise, we'll see what happens. There will be suffering. The only palliative to the evils of life is union and harmony. If you think about what could be evils of life, greed, oppression, you'll think of others. But all of these are coming from a sense of separateness. That is the root of all evil, that sense of separateness, the violence, the greed, the desire to oppress, the desire to possess. Every thought, desire, or action affects in some measure the equilibrium of the universe. So stop there for a moment and think about if we are just one life wave and we are all different expressions or parts of that. Anyone here who's causing a disturbance in this part of the ocean is disturbing everything else, right? Is disturbing the equilibrium of the whole. Once this harmony has been disturbed, the universe, which is the whole, has to seek to return to balance. The process of seeking to restore equilibrium is what we call karma. That's what HPB says in Key to Theosophy. So any disturbance in this ocean of oneness needs to be corrected so that harmony can be restored. And that's why we have the heavy blows of karma that we seem to be always encountering. The only decree of karma is absolute harmony. It's not therefore karma that rewards or punishes, and most of us would think of karma as reward or punishment. It is we who reward or punish ourselves according to whether we work with, through, and along with nature, abiding by the laws on which harmony depends. So the heavy blows of karma will keep coming for as long as we are disturbing the equilibrium. If we can understand this, not just think of karma as reward and punishment, if we can understand that because we are just an ocean that is one, we will probably try not to rock the boat too much, so to speak. This is the Buddha. And the Buddha said that, well, the Buddha taught quite a bit about suffering. And suffering is not just the heavy blows of karma. Suffering wakes us up. Suffering is a way for us to learn. Suffering is a way for us to realize what we are missing. How can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering? HPB said, is it not the people who have suffered a lot, who have learned the deceptive value of earthly hopes and the elusive allurements of external nature, who are destined to solve the great problems of life, pain, and death? Suffering is not bad. Suffering wakes us up. Every year we have this breakout groups. What brought you to the Theosophical Society? I have heard many people say it's because they were going through something very difficult in their lives, and they started to ask questions. There is a value to suffering. It wakes us up. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from our attachments. And attachments come from our identification with this separate self. I want this. When we know this, we can begin to use the law of karma consciously for our liberation from the effects of our past ignorance. But why are we ignorant? And the Buddha said, it is strange. It is strange. It is so strange indeed. How could it be that all of these beings completely possess the Buddha's wisdom? And yet, because of their ignorance and delusions, they fail to realize this, even fail to perceive this. In the voice of the silence, it says, "Thou art Buddha." I don't feel it. Do you? Thou art Buddha. So the Buddha himself wondered, how could it be that it's in there, but we don't know it, we don't perceive it? This is from I.K. Timely. The ultimate reality underlying the universe is hidden in its fullness and splendor in the heart of each and every one of us. We know that. It's hidden there. It is possible to become aware of this all-inclusive reality, he says, if we can direct our mind to it earnestly and make the necessary effort. If we do so, Yogananda wrote, the first veil that will vanish will be ignorance. When we can see clearly, as the veil of ignorance disappears, unskillful behavior will go next. We'll be more mindful of how we behave. And then next, desire ceases, because desire is related to our identification with the lower nature. And then selfishness will end, and all misery will disappear. The trick then is, how do we do that? Well, first of all, why do we even want to do that? In the Mahatma letters, it says, the only object to be striven for is the amelioration of the condition of man by the spread of truth. Amelioration of the condition of man. Something similar from the voice of the silence. To live to benefit mankind is the first step. I wondered a little bit about why are we only talking about mankind? What about the other creatures? Don't we also have to uplift them? I found a good answer from our former international president, Radha Bernier. And she said, the reason we're talking about mankind here is because we are the problem. She said, nature can very well take care of her own, but it's very hard for nature to do that when we are constantly creating imbalance and problems. So it is humanity that needs to be uplifted from this ignorance. In Lucifer, it says, true occultism is the destruction of the false idea of self. This is what we have been talking all along, right? We are identifying with this false idea of who we are, this limited self. We are forgetting that we are more. Remember those layers of fields that, from which the column of light descends. We are only in that little piece. There's so many layers of life above us. So how do we do this? It has already been mentioned by Maria and Pablo. Altruism and selflessness was strongly recommended by HPB. Altruism, living for others, unselfishly. HPB also taught, along with the Buddha, that the other way is through meditation. Why? It is through meditation that enlightenment is, I can't say possible, but maybe it makes it easier. But enlightenment has to be attained, not for self-liberation, but for the benefit of humanity. That must be the first thing in life. Let us think about that for a bit. When we are trying to meditate, we are lifting consciousness beyond identification with the emotions and this monkey mind that we have, so that it can become still. It has been said, in the background of everything, there is that silence. If we can quiet down this lower mind, we may be able to perceive that which is eternal. And that can only happen in silence. We perceive the Buddhic principle, which is the universal consciousness within us. And this is the value of learning to meditate or practicing. It doesn't mean we become Buddhists right away, but even that little practice of sitting still and finding silence. Everyone who seeks, finds, and treads the way of holiness lightens the heavy karma of the world, because we are all one. They liberate forces of love, light, peace, and quicken the evolution of the whole race. So these practices are not for us. It is for the whole of us. Anyone who moves forward brings everyone else along with them. So, dedicate yourself to the quest. If you have been sitting here, as you have, lecture after lecture on seeking eternal truth, you must already have a flame within you. But the flame is not enough. Fire is what is wanted. Fire. That burning enthusiasm, that flaming and resistless will is what we need. Because it is so easy for us to intellectualize these things. But the moment we walk out of the room, we are back to our old thinking. But when we realize this and we believe it, with sheer will and determination to attain, we will be able to reach the quest. Again, not for oneself, but for all of mankind. If you have the flame, feed it, grow it, spread it.